Hello, this is Scott. One of the latest hobbies that I have embarked on in the last year or so is aquaponics. And I thought I'd do a quick video to share with you why I got involved in aquaponics. And I have some slides here that I'll include in the presentation that I'm going to use to make sure I don't miss anything. So over the last several decades, I have played around with gardening. I think in my teens, I'd go visit my brother and sister-in-law in Pennsylvania, and they had a big conventional garden, and I kind of caught the bug then. And anywhere I've lived over the years, I've tried to build a conventional garden. And especially here in the hill country, I've really struggled with conventional gardening. And the hill country offers many unique challenges. First of all, there's no soil. It's all rocks. Never was soil, even back when it was grasslands before the settlers came. There was a very thin layer of soil that was protected by the grassland, and so we had these beautiful rolling hills of grass in the hill country. But as soon as people started digging it up with a plow, and then the next rainstorm came through, over a decade or so, washed it all away. So the first thing is there's no soil. So anytime you do a conventional garden here in the hill country, and you'll know it as soon as you put a shovel in the ground, you'll get about 2 inches in, and then you're just hitting maybe some loose caliche, but more likely rock, and you're gonna go get your pickaxe to try and dig a hole big enough to plant anything, let alone do a garden. Gardens don't grow in rock. Second thing in the hill country is rain. On average in Austin here, and it gets worse the farther you go west, we get 33 inches. You say, 33 inches, that's moderate. Problem is that 33 inches, you could go 4 months no rain, and then you get 5 inches in one rainstorm. And what if 5 inches happen? 5 inches of rain on dry soil, what happens? Washes all the soil away. And unless you live in some rare spot where it's flat, that's going to get washed out of your lawn, down the drain, down into the sewer. So all that money you spend on soil to build up something you can grow vegetables in just disappeared. So first thing, hill country, very challenging to do a garden because of soil, no soil, and water when it comes is, it's not very often. When it comes, it can be devastating. So I've struggled with conventional gardening. I've gotten some yields once in a while, but nothing to write home about. It seemed like a lot of expense, a lot of effort for very little output. Not to say it can't be done. There's lots of people, lots of YouTube videos that have successful gardens in the hill country, and all the power to them. Just didn't work for me. Second thing is I love science projects. When I had my brewery, Adalbert's Brewery, I added lots of automation, PLCs to control things. And with aquaponics system, with pumps and moving water around, looking at pH levels, haven't automated that yet, but filling, lots of opportunities to do automation. So it's like, hey, I can combine two of my hobbies. For other people, that may not be as exciting. The other nice thing I liked, and I'll walk you around this later, is you can add water features to an aquaponics system because you're growing fish, raising fish in tanks, and then you have beds, and the water needs to move back and forth between them. Which gives you lots of opportunities to do. You can add waterfalls, stream beds, things like that make it more visually appealing. Which I alluded to just before. You get dual harvest because you're raising fish and vegetables together in a symbiotic relationship. And the aquaponics, for a lot of reasons, is more productive year-round. I'll go in future videos as well, but it's more productive. We'll go into it later. So diving a little more into the benefits, if you're thinking about doing aquaponics yourself, fish and plants exist symbiotically, which means the fish produce waste. You feed them, they generate ammonia and solid waste, and those are converted by nitrogen-fixing bacteria into ammonias or into fertilizer that the plants can use, nitrates. Then the plants, as absorbing that fertilizer to grow, are cleaning the water for the fish. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. As a result of that, there's very little fertilizer required. You have to look at your potassium and phosphorus, iron, a couple other trace minerals, but you're not putting big nitrogen inputs into your soil, worrying about, did I get enough compost in it? Okay, I better bring another truckload of compost in to rebuild that soil, because the plants, especially heavy feeders like tomatoes and peppers, they will use up that soil. So you need to be constantly adding more nitrogen in the soil, especially if you don't want to use heavy chemical fertilizers, which can mess up the microbe level in your soil. Can get quite expensive. And which leads in the next point: no soil. If you live in the Midwest and you have several feet of beautiful topsoil that stays in place, aquaponics may not make as much sense, because you have a beautiful soil. You throw a watermelon seed in the ground and you notice a month later you've got a big watermelon plant growing. Don't happen here. If you throw it on the ground, it's in rocks, and the sun, 100-degree sun, hits it and everything's dead. So don't have to bring any soil. If you don't have soil, which we don't here, you don't need soil for aquaponics. You do need some type of medium for the plants to grow in. Like I use a mix. Some beds are gravel, some are clay balls, and the clay balls can be very expensive, but they are probably the best medium. So I've kind of used a balance between them. Best medium for airflow, for keeping the nitrogen fixing bacteria healthy. Gravel is much cheaper. The downside is you have to be very careful about your fish waste buildup in gravel. It's much more prone to becoming clogged and then not getting a good airflow into the soil, which I've had several beds already that have this problem. So need to be, probably, if you are going with gravel, then I would definitely be thinking about solid lift filters in any of your fish tanks. One of the big things here in the hill country is water. Water is very expensive. City of Austin discourages water use by making water super expensive. We probably spend, I don't know, my wife pays the bill, but she'll periodically let me know about it, $400-600 or more dollars a month on water. And we do have a pool, so that's part of it, but water's expensive. And aquaponics uses 70 to 90% less water. And circumstantially, I have noticed this when I have a conventional garden bed. I'm putting a ton of water on it for not much benefit. The aquaponics is pretty good at conserving the water, because the water stays, of course you have your ponds, which are going to be evaporating from the fish, but the water that goes into the grow beds, if you have it designed correctly, stays an inch or two below the level of the gravel. And then goes down from there, to suck air in, then comes up to water your plants, the roots. So the water's not exposed to the hot Texas sun. It's kept isolated below your grow bed, which really slows down evaporation out of the soil. Still evaporation out of the plants, can't do anything about that, but evaporation out of the soil. The thing, since you don't have soil, no soil-borne diseases. All your things that love to decimate your garden, that have a phase of life in the soil, not happen in aquaponics. So, all the soil-borne diseases, I might get a snail once in a while or slug, but really that happens in beds that I do not have the water level maintained properly, and the water is coming up to the top of the gravel. If you have it designed correctly, keep the water an inch or two below the surface on your garden beds, all those soil-borne pests, funguses, and things like that, not going to be a problem. Here is a list of common diseases comparing conventional garden to aquaponics that I generated in ChatGPT, if you're curious. I think an aquaponics system can last decades. The one I have designed, I did with a ton of masonry for aesthetic value. You can certainly do it with plastic totes. You can do it with wood. There's lots of options on how to build it, and there's trade-offs between the ornamental value, the expense up front, and mobility, which things we can talk about in the future. Obviously my stone beds, if I decide to move to South Carolina to go live in lower tax state, can't take all my masonry with me. If I had done it with more portable beds, whether it's wood or planters, things like that, or totes, plastic totes, pretty easy to throw that on the moving truck and reset it up somewhere new. So there are, if you think you want to move, you want to get in aquaponics, risky moving, maybe you don't want to do masonry, because it's going to be whoever buys your property's problem when you leave, or advantage, depending on how you look at that. Talked a little about this before. When you're growing aquaponics, you have fish, because fish are generating the waste. Depending on the variety you pick, something simple like goldfish, not gonna eat goldfish, not good food. But you can raise tilapia or bass or trout. Here in Central Texas, I'd say in which I have played with and the researched on, tilapia and hybrid striped bass they grow phenomenally fast, and you're controlling the environment. You're controlling what's input into the fish, the fish food they're eating, and they taste phenomenal. Better than anything you get in the store. I know tilapia has a bad rap, and especially there are areas in the world where they grow them in very polluted pools, a lot of waste products in the stream, and they can be very nasty tasting, just like a catfish you might get out of a poor river bottom might taste really fishy, really nasty. Well, it's really, they are a product of the environment they're growing up in and the feed they're eating. And when you control the environment, what they're eating, you have them in clean water, because you're keeping it clean with the plants, and you pick a quality fish food, fish are going to be healthy and good tasting. Vegetables are high yielding in aquaponics. The reason for this is the root ball is getting several times an hour, or maybe a little less depending how you set up your system, is getting a wash of fertilizer and water and nutrients, and then the water drains away, and then you have the roots exposed to air. So this is like the ideal medium for plants to grow. They need oxygen, they need fertilizer, they need water. But if you're underwater all the time, that can be bad for them if the water isn't enough oxygen. But consequently, the plants grow really, really well, really, really fast. They don't spend much time growing roots. If you've grown conventional gardens especially here in the hill country where it gets really hot in the summer, you'll see tomato plants throwing out roots that go 3-4 feet, and that takes a lot of energy for the plant to do that. But it's seeking out moisture and nutrients, and to be able to a cat just wiggled the fence there, I'm sorry. Those nutrients, it has to do that big heavy root system to make sure it has enough access to moisture and nutrients to keep those plants alive. In aquaponics, it's in nirvana. Everything's there day in and day out, so consequently your root ball is really small, and all the plant growth goes into growing vines and fruit. And you have to be careful on your mineral profile to make sure that you get fruit, otherwise they'll just keep growing vines. I've had tomato vines that are 6, 8, 12 feet long, and I've had squash plants that have grown 30 feet up the trees. You're not careful. High yield science project. I kind of talked a little bit about that. There's always I'm continually looking at the system, analyzing, do I need another pump here? Do I need more airflow for the, especially bass are very sensitive to oxygen level. And if you get high water temperature with low oxygen level, they'll start showing stress and eventually die. So there's many variables that you have to track, such as pH. It's not crazy, but you need to be wary of pH, chlorine in your water being added. But there's on the fun side of it is you can think about, okay, how do I improve the water flow here? Can I add a water flow there to help aerate the water? A lot of fun, constant tweaking you can do to the system. Some people that is a negative, some that's a positive. I enjoy doing that. And as I mentioned earlier, if you think you're going to move in the next 5 years, especially someone like me, close to retirement, that's something to consider. I didn't. I went with the masonry for the looks, but you can design your system so you can take it with you. If you made really fancy, nice raised beds with you brought in a bunch of soil, truckloads and truckloads of soil, which you're going to keep doing, and irrigation systems for a conventional garden, and then you decide to move, not going to take that with you. That's basically left for the next person. If you're thinking you're going to move and you want to have something to take with you, you can do that with aquaponics. Challenges, as you probably figured out listening to me talk already, I built a really expensive masonry system, which is expensive. There's a lot of masonry. I did the initial 4 ponds that were conventional beds. I converted them to aquaponics beds and added a pond, and I think I spent $5,000 to have someone come in and blow gunite over it all, and then I sealed it. And I start thinking about that money. It's like, that's too much. I like doing manual labor, so everything I've done consequently after that, I've done stone and masonry myself, which I may do some videos talking about that. There are lots of good videos some videos on how to build masonry walls. And again, that's something, if you're a gardener, you probably like to do manual labor, otherwise you wouldn't be gardening. You just go to the store and buy, the less desirable things they sell in the store. So maybe building masonry walls, or spending time building a garden beds is something that is attractive to you. It was attractive to me, and I kind of look at it, well, that's kind of good exercise. If I wasn't building that stone wall, I would be at the gym lifting weights anyway. So now I'm actually saving money on the construction, and I get my workout for free. Strange, I know, strange. But a not higher initial setup cost. I kind of wandered a lot there. You start thinking about just building the ponds. You have to have tanks. Whether you're buying totes or doing ponds that you dig a hole out. Then you got to buy pumps and piping to move stuff around. So there is more money there. But in the hill country, you also have to balance that with doing conventional gardening. You're buying soil, which is not cheap either. As I mentioned, you got to have pumps to move the water around between the beds. Pumps cost money, and they are, depending on how you do your system, you're going to be maintaining those pumps. Submersible pumps last a pretty long time, but if you have leaves coming into your system, if you have a heavy waste load from the fish, the pumps can tend to clog up. And depending on how time of year or what you're doing, you're going to be cleaning pumps, periodically pulling apart, cleaning out the impellers, cleaning out some of the hose. A lot of that can be negated by your system design. Like I have one pump that's in a tank with freshwater shrimp. Hey Jack, hey dear boy. My neighbor's dog. The one tank that has a shrimp in it, turns out the shrimp hang out on the input of the pump. Are sitting there eating all the stuff that accumulates on the input filter of the pump. I never have to clean that one. So there is ways around it. You are going to have to do water, pH, and mineral management. So you're going to have a little test kit. I have an API, which I like. Not a big deal to use. It's a few minutes every couple days, but you especially need to keep an eye on the pH. And when you're starting up, you want to watch your nitrites and ammonium build up. I already talked about science project. Fish food can be expensive. I'm probably dropping, if you can go to the nurseries, where they sell the fish farms, good proper word, to buy your food, get it pretty cheap, maybe $40 a bag for a good Cargill, Triton. If you're having someone mail it to you, they're going to charge twice as much because FedEx shipping is like $60 or $70. And you can get some things, like there's a Purina that's not is quite as good, by MBP 500, but it does cost probably close to 70 or 80, but they'll deliver it to your door. So there's that trade-off. And startup, I alluded a little bit, startup stabilization. When you first start up, you need to go light on your fish food and number fish till the nitrogen fixing bacteria has a chance to set up. And they will, as there's waste products there, through the air, they drop in and start multiplying. And when there's available food, because they like to eat the nitrites and ammonium and then convert that to nitrates for you, they'll eventually multiply and stabilize, and you'll have a stable system, but it does take some time. Here is a summary comparing aquaponics to traditional gardening that I generated using ChatGPT. Following this and the video, I will take you for a tour of my aquaponics system. So here's a tour of my aquaponics system. This is one of the latest beds I've added. It was a wood bed I had above another pond that I decided to move around. This pond here is, looks like that pump is starting to clog up a little bit. That's a radial flow filter. But this bed came from another bed and I repurposed it over here. Keep walking around here. These shades I've added, I used to have a tree here, but it got so big that it was shading the garden beds and they weren't growing much. The shade was kind of nice for the ponds, but bad for growing vegetables. So the compromise is I've added these stands above the ponds to help shade them a little bit. And you can see the vines are starting to grow on top of it. That is a Tromboncino squash vine, and then there's some poblano peppers behind it. This is the actual sump. This is the lowest spot in the system. You can see that that pond there is flowing into it, even though it's lower on the elevation of the yard. And I've also got a small, like a third of a horsepower chiller that's chilling the water. Since this is the one that gets the most sun, it gets the hottest. These beds were the ones that 1, 2, 3, 4. They were traditional garden beds that I had issues growing vegetables in because the trees up here behind it would grow the roots up into the beds. It liked the water and the fertilizer and the healthy soil, and so after one season my garden wasn't really producing much because it was just tapped out by the trees. There's a poblano pepper there. I don't know if you can see them. This one here is a new one I'm trying. It's a Armenian cucumber. It's supposedly more tolerant or less susceptible to squash or the vine borers. It seems to be doing okay. I mean, back here it's kind of a little tired. I don't know if you can see any of there is one Armenian cucumber down there. This bed's a little bit in transition. It was covered with a bunch of cherry tomatoes, so many cherry tomatoes. I got a couple peppers growing in it. Here is another Tromboncino squash, and there's some okra in there. Looks like something got after that leaf last night. Probably, if I was going to venture to guess, probably a grasshopper. Here's a stream bed feature I've added. I think I talked about that a little bit, that I like to incorporate streams and troughs. And this trough down here is kind of funny in that the fish the tilapia love to swim up that stream. And so if you come out and catch them, they'll a lot of times be way up at the top, and then they do a mad panic when they see you to make it back down to the pond. Another bed that's got a pond underneath it. This is the one with the shrimp in it. Still has some shrimp. I put some structures in there for the shrimp to hang out over the winter. It's just a mint plant. If anyone raised mint, you know how crazy it gets out of control, so it's good to have it in an isolated spot. This bed, has some peppers and some okra in the back, and then I have a bunch of something new I've tried is the yard-long beans. You can see one there in the front that's actually overripe, but you can kind of use those as black-eyed peas once they get, to be a whole bean. But they're really tasty to eat straight off the vine. See if I can find one that is ready to, these are a little small. If, in between size of those two would be a good one to munch. They're not really around too often because I eat them really fast. This one is a bopo squash. I just picked the other one, several today, but there's one there. You can kind of get a feel for them. They're general squash, flavorless. So they're great in soups. Very traditional Indian, Chinese. There's another poblano there that's getting some decent sized peppers on it. Basil. Basil is something that I let go to seed. You see a couple snails on it there though. I'll let it to go to seed, and then it just comes up. So these are all pretty much freebie plants. My sister-in-law call them volunteers. There's another volunteer basil as well. And there's some beans mixed in there. Here's the biggest pond, the one I added most recently. And the interesting thing on this pond, well, there's some beds on top of it. And we're also walking on the playscape that I redid when I built this pond. You can see, there's a slide, and that inset actually sits below the water level, so you can walk out of the slide. The slide's below the water level, so that's why I did that. Kind of a crazy thing to do, because it was all sorts of complications on getting that to not leak. And I don't know if you noticed when I walked by that it still was leaking. This is a barrel I'm using as a radial flow filter, and it somewhat works. What I'll do is drain it down. You can see the water inlet there with a small pump. Shut that off, let it drain down to that, and then I'll stir up what's in the bottom and drain it through that bottom black hose. And I've actually hooked the pump up. That works a little better. Those beds are just made of planters that I got at Home Depot to kind of dress up that area a little bit. And those are kind of a good, I'll probably do a video in the future on that. They're a good way to do an aquaponics bed without, it's something that's movable. So once you dump that gravel out, it's just a simple bed, a windowsill bed. So it's very light. It's made out of PVC. I did paint it and seal it and all that. And I don't know if you notice all those feeders, but I have feeders go off twice a day to kind of keep a base level of food on the system. I don't know if you can see any of the fish swimming around down there. You sometimes see them when they cross that. This is my attempt at doing a pour attempt. You see that white pipe down there? That is a radial, or one of a solids lift filter. I'm trying to, something I didn't do. If I some point I'll probably add in the future, but I've got to take the water level down since it's a masonry to insert a pipe through it. But this tank is really begging for a solids lift filter, and that pipe is a pseudo one. It seems to be helping out some, but certainly it could use more flow. I don't know if you notice, there's certainly lots. I've got 6 air stones in there. When I initially put the bass up in here, they were struggling. You can see them kind of listing around at the top, and finally figured out that there was not enough air. And so once I added 3 air pumps that had 2 air stones each, so there's 6 or 8 stones in there. I have to go back and count them. Then the bass pretty much in a couple days got much better. I don't know if you can see the tilapia hanging out down. Once you're that goldfish looking one is actually tilapia as well. They genetically vary quite a lot as they breed, which tilapia will breed like crazy in a healthy aquaponic system. And this is a trench I put down the back. I thought it would be a cool idea, and I thought it'd be even cooler if I added some dams in it. Unfortunately, when you get leaves or seaweed, because algae will grow in it, the worst one was the water cabbages. That kind of vetoed those, gradually moved them all out of the system because they just tend to back up and block everything up. But in that, when those that bed or that stream bed back there backs up, then it tends to overflow, and then I'd start losing water from the system. So I've had many times, especially when I'm out of town, I'll come back and that poor the sump with the tilapia and goldfish in it are sitting there, hovering around in 6 inches of water because all the water was pumped out of the system. And this is up here was a playscape I had built 20 years ago for my kids when they were little. Now they're 30, almost 30. My son's 28 or something. But when I was building that pond, I decided, well, as long as I'm doing it, why don't I rip out all the old rotten landscape timbers and redo it in stone, so it'll basically be good forever. So this is definitely a build it and they will come for, hopefully for grandkids. I have brought some of my friends' grandkids over, and they will testify that it's a fun place to hang out. And what cannot be fun? You got slides, you got swings, you got tree fork to hang out in, and then you got fish to catch. So that's kind of the overall system. Thanks for watching, and click the like button.